Canada's vehicle imports from Mexico have overtaken those from the United States for the first time in over 30 years, signaling a major shift in North America's auto trade dynamics as President Donald Trump's tariffs reshape industry patterns. Statistics. Canada data show that in June, Canadian importers purchased $1 billion in passenger vehicles from Mexico, surpassing the $950 million sourced from the U.S. This is the first time in records dating back to the early 1990s that Mexican auto exports to Canada have exceeded those from the U.S. The reversal occurred after President Donald Trump invoked Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act to impose a sweeping 25% tariff on imported vehicles beginning April 3, 2025, linking auto imports to national security and disrupting the previously seamless flow of cars and parts under the USMCA. Although autos that comply with the USMCA rules of origin are subject only to tariffs on their non-US content, and thus enjoy partial relief, the broader measure has nonetheless strained trade ties between the US and Canada. According to Bloomberg, Canada is the largest foreign buyer of US-made cars and light trucks, making this shift a potential gauge of the tariff's impact. In 2024, the U.S. posted an auto trade surplus with Canada, with exports of finished vehicles to Canada exceeding those to Germany, Mexico, and China combined. Automakers such as General Motors Company and Ford Motor Company have traditionally supplied Canada from U.S. plants, reflecting the long-standing integration of the North American auto industry. While Canada maintains significant assembly capacity, GM's Cami plant in Ingersoll, now producing electric vans, and the Oshawa facility, turning out Silverado pickups. Most vehicles sold in the Canadian market have historically come from American factories. Ford's Oakville Assembly Complex in Ontario, once a cornerstone of Canadian auto manufacturing, is currently idle. However, the company plans a major revival of the facility with production of FS Series Super Duty pickups scheduled to begin in 2026. The project represents a substantial reinvestment estimated at roughly $3 billion. Including $2.3 billion dedicated to stamping and assembly upgrades, and is expected to produce up to 100,000 trucks annually, while incorporating flexible multi-energy manufacturing capabilities for future models. General Motors, meanwhile, has also adjusted its production strategy in light of shifting trade dynamics and tariff pressures. The company is committing approximately $4 billion over the next 2 years to expand assembly operations in Michigan, Kansas, and Tennessee, a move designed to bring more SUV and pickup truck production back to the U.S. and reduce reliance on Mexican and Canadian output. These strategic changes underscore how deeply tariffs and political uncertainty are influencing automaker investment decisions, altering supply chains that for decades moved vehicles and parts freely across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. However, some analysts believe these changes may not be lasting and that Mexico's position as Canada's top vehicle supplier could prove temporary. In February and March, Canadian purchases of U.S. vehicles averaged $25 billion per month as manufacturers rushed shipments before tariffs took effect, well above the $18 billion monthly average last year. Despite higher costs, most major automakers have avoided large-scale price hikes, instead relocating some production to the U.S. or adjusting supply chains to prioritize made-in-America cars for domestic buyers. Still, industry experts warn that prolonged uncertainty is unsettling investment decisions. Aaron Keating, executive analyst at Cox Automotive Inc., told Bloomberg that U.S. policymakers must recognize the nation's competitive edge stems from its integration within the North American supply chain. Brian Kingston, CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, said there is a begrudging acceptance that tariffs may become a long-term fixture, leaving companies to decide whether to shift production, absorb costs, or pass them on to consumers. One of the most debated topics among economists is the impact of tariffs on the auto industry and consumers. The central question is simple: who really ends up paying the price? Let's take a closer look. Since President Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs took effect in April 2025, the real cost to consumers has been slower to appear than many economists predicted. But history and early data suggests that higher prices, reduced quality, and fewer options are inevitable. The average tariff on imports to the U.S. is now above 13%, with some goods, such as most Chinese imports, facing levies of 30%. Initially, fears of steep price spikes failed to materialize. Consumer inflation reports have been subdued, and companies from Walmart to General Motors have largely resisted raising sticker prices. According to Harvard economist Alberto Cavallo, the burden of these tariffs so far has not fallen on foreign exporters as the administration claimed it would. Instead, U.S. importers have been paying the duties at ports and airports, choosing for now to absorb the added costs rather than pass them along to shoppers. This temporary cushion exists partly because many companies anticipated Trump's move and stockpiled goods before April. Apple, for example, reportedly flew in 600 tons of iPhones from India in advance. Drawing from these inventories has allowed firms to delay price hikes. But as stockpiles dwindle, businesses will have to choose between eroding their profit margins or raising prices. GM, which reported a $1.1 billion drop in quarterly profit linked to tariffs, has so far opted to absorb the hit rather than risk losing customers. Cavallo's research, tracking hundreds of thousands of products from major U.S. retailers, shows it often takes months for tariffs to filter into retail prices. In Trump's 2017 tariff round, noticeable price increases didn't appear for nearly half a year, and even then, many companies were still partially shielding customers from the full impact. That shielding, however, has limits. Signs of change are emerging. Data from the Harvard Pricing Lab indicate retail prices have already risen about 3% on average in categories most exposed to Chinese imports such as furniture, household goods, and electronics. Beyond obvious price increases, companies can pass on costs more subtly through shrinkflation, smaller product sizes for the same price, skimpflation, using cheaper materials, hidden fees, or reduced perks. Tariffs can also lead to disappearing products. If importing certain goods becomes unprofitable, companies may simply stop offering them, shrinking consumer choice. After the 2017 tariffs, U.S. imports from China fell roughly 10% over 2 years, and similar patterns could re-emerge under the current measures. Economists warn that once inventories are depleted and trade policies settle, the impact on consumers will become clearer and harder to avoid. Whether through higher price tags, lower quality, hidden surcharges, or vanishing goods, the cost of tariffs ultimately tends to land on the public. The current calm, in other words, is unlikely to last. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. As an independent channel, we don't have corporate backing. We rely on your support to keep going. If you found this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps more people find our work. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Check out the next video on your screen. We picked it just for you.